Okay, thank you. Mr. Gill.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Humanitarian aid really is a pot that can never be filled, but that does not mean that we should not try to do it. However, in point 1 of the general guidelines for the 2015 budget, you state that the EU economy is showing signs of recovery. Dare we say it, little green shoots. Compared to the Eurozone, Britain's economy is doing very well. However, we have 13 million people in the UK living below the poverty line. In North Wales, where I come from, 17,000 individuals or families have had to turn to food banks to survive, and there has been a 21% hike in shoplifting offences in North Wales. According to the Police and Crime Commissioner, poverty has driven the people to steal. People are literally having to make a choice of whether to eat or heat their home. In point 4, you are asking impoverished member states that are saddled with debt that can never be repaid to donate 0.7% of their gross national income by next year. We are asking our citizens to live within their means or even to tighten their belts and to scrape a living. It costs €3.3 billion a year to run the Commission, in administration costs alone. May I suggest that the Commission tightens its belt and not the taxpayer, and that the committee blocks the wasteful projects such as when the EU spent €10 million on an employment centre in Mali in the Sahara that only found jobs for 8 Malayans out of a population of 14.5 million people, or when Burkina Faso was given €462,000 to fund the I Dance, Therefore I Am project in a country where over half of the population live on $1.26 a day.
Thank you, Mr. Gill.
Yeah, thank you. A budget of €17 million, which is about 34 euro cents per citizen. This really isn't going to get to the people. People are not going to be aware of it. I can almost guarantee that when I go back home next year and I speak to the people in Wales, practically none of them will have a clue that it was the year of development. Surely this money would be better off being spent paying for vaccinations or actually direct aid to the people who need it, instead of what, as far as I can see, is just pure propaganda for the EU.
Well, as you've just heard at the beginning, it was a decision taken in the last period by the governments of Europe, 28 governments of Europe plus the European Parliament. So that decision has been taken in the previous Parliament and by ministers as well. So I think Mr. LIETZ wanted the floor.
I just want to give a short comment on the quote you just gave. I think it's very important, and this kind of campaigns give a better understanding and awareness that exactly what you said, having enough money to support people, for example, for vaccine, is important. And for that awareness, you need a public awareness and you need a public support that governments and the European Union is going to spend amount of monies for humanitarian aid. And in that regard, I would like not only to question but to speak against your quote you just have given. And I think I have heard this in the announcement before about you just totally opposite against any humanitarian aid situation and support. So I really wonder on the situation of your work here to support our work as a group amongst parties and amongst members throughout European unions, to think about why we are sitting here together in order to promote humanitarian aid, in order to promote development worldwide. This is our responsibility, and I haven't heard anything about that. Just as a general quote, I just wanted to mention that I was kind of surprised about your statements. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very quickly, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, sure. In the first statement I made earlier on, I was saying that basically for, for us to cut waste and bureaucracy and use that money for humanitarian aid is what we should be looking at and what this committee should be trying to push through. So I fail to see what you've said, that I'm against humanitarian aid, because I'm not against humanitarian aid at all. And the final point that I made about basically pure propaganda, this will not increase aid to people in Africa or people in need, in Burma or in other countries. All it's doing is basically providing work for people who, quite frankly, are doing nothing, and it's basically propaganda for the EU. If the citizens back home in the country where I come from want to donate to a charity, they should be allowed to donate to a charity. It is not up to governments to tax people and spend their taxes on charitable work. It's up to people to donate to charity. Thank you.
Okay, I've got I have a question, I've got another speaker, and the next question is Madam Maite PAGAZAURTUNDÚA. I can't, Ruiz, you have to tell me how to pronounce your name. Maybe you say it, and then I can learn how to say your name. How do you pronounce? Yeah? Madam Maite.
Bueno, es un apellido vasco-español, sí.
It's a Basque-Spanish surname, actually. Now, I'm a new member of Parliament, and I've worked in the management of humanitarian and social issues, and so I'm completely against what has been said. I don't think that all campaigns should be considered as being propaganda, which is what Mr. Gill has said more or less. We need to bear in mind the fact that we're going through societal changes, very important societal changes, cyclical changes, and if we want to develop solidarity principles for the future, we're going to need to make sure that we have certain campaigns which raise awareness among people. It's very important that we need to make sure that we get involved in this as an engine in this committee. Many of us, we know that we want to get involved, and what we're going to do if we spend the money and if we spend it well, what we're going to achieve is going to be very important. We need citizens, and that we too are responsible. We're going through a time of change. It's a very important moment, and this shouldn't be turned into propaganda. We have the responsibility to make sure that it doesn't just turn into blah, blah, blah and propaganda. The money can be very well invested if we are able to think, reflect together with European citizens, because we're not removed from them and they're not removed from us. The way in which you have understood things is somewhat unfair. I think that, I'm new. I don't like just spending money. I'm used to saving money to carry out work on the ground, cooperation with cooperatives, all of that type of thing. But now we need to get close. We need to approach the citizens. We need to get close to the citizens. We absolutely need to do this during this time, this society, this moment of so many changes. We can't be bureaucratic. We can't just leave things on paper. We don't want to just have blah, blah, blah and words. No, we don't want that. We know that we can spend this money well, we can invest well, and we can be responsible with this money.
Okay, I have now Madam Lola Sánchez, and then Mr. CORRAO, and then Mr. Goerens wanted the floor back. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have a comment. I would agree with Mr. Gill, because this does seem to be a publicity stunt, as it were, basically whitewashing vis-a-vis public opinion. And I don't think that we should be The speaker stops. I don't think we should be using this money to convince our citizens that I think are already convinced that we need to show solidarity, but it's also a group of citizens that have been suffering because of the perverse economic situation. I don't see any criticism here against those who are really guilty of this situation. developed countries and developing countries. I don't see any measures to convince politicians such as ourselves and politicians in our member states and politicians in developing countries. I don't think we should be convincing our citizens, but we're asking people who can't show solidarity because they have nothing to show solidarity. And I think that this is a very condescending statement from people who have not lived up to their commitments, and I don't think will amount to much because I think our people do have solidarity.
CORRAO, please CORRAO. I thought it was, yeah, because it's like Portuguese then, CORRAO, yes.
Ok. Bene, io...
Well, I also wanted to say that I agree with what our colleague Mr. Gill has said and what our Spanish colleague has just said, because the impression here is that we're being rather hypocritical as the EU. So, first of all, we go along to these countries, we sell arms, we lead to these wars exploding, and then we bring them a present. So it's as if someone comes along to your house and cleans you out and then leaves you a bunch of flowers on the table and says that we're helping you. Now, I think this committee should come forward with a completely different idea. First of all, we need to think about who's doing the exploitation, who's selling arms, who's causing wars. And then we need to think about who should bring the humanitarian aid. Because I don't think we should be engaging in this propaganda saying that the EU is good because it's bringing you vaccines, it's bringing you humanitarian aid. Because I think that's hypocritical and it's really taking the local people for a ride. So let's try and approach this in a serious way.
Oui, le débat qui a été lancé maintenant est très intéressant.
Well, this is a very interesting debate, but I do think we've got to clear up all these misunderstandings. I heard Mr. Gill say that this campaign is going to cost each European citizen €34. Well, it's 1,000 times less, actually, if you divide 17 million.
Excuse me, you're not a member of this committee, and you're not allowed to take the floor. So please... No, I'm just saying you're not a member of this committee, and in fact, really, you shouldn't be sitting in that seat. I wasn't going to say in public, but in future, these seats are reserved for members of this committee, and I'm just saying you do not take the floor in this committee.
J'ai entendu.
So please let our member, and next time, please sit with the other. Yes,
Je ne peux dire que c'est que j'ai entendu.
Well, all I can say is what I heard. I heard someone say €34 per citizen, but it's actually 1,000 times less if you divide 17 million by 100 million. It's 0.034 cents. That's 3.4 euro cents per person. So let's make sure we've got our facts straight. Obviously, we're not now going to be reforming maths, are we?
Thank you, Mr. Neuser.
It's just the same I want to say, because the figures were absolutely wrong. It's per each member citizen of the European Union 3 cents. And I think this is okay.
Okay, as I said, this decision has already been taken. It was taken. We're here to hear a presentation of how the decision will be implemented in this Parliament. And I was going to ask maybe just one question to finish today is how do we make sure that this year is heard in our schools, in our towns, in our cities? There's a lot of NGOs here who work with civil society, with organisations in my country like Oxfam. We will hear from Concord. They will also be involved, and I know they have been involved in the planning. They were behind the idea, actually, with citizens' organisations. And many, as I know, I go around many schools in my own constituency, and maybe you could do that too and talk about development aid and how important it is. And you'll find there's a good hearing in schools and amongst churches and other organisations who are fully supportive of the idea of having assistance in humanitarian aid for people in developing countries. So maybe you should say something about the involvement, or ask the Commission to say a little bit about the involvement of NGOs and about the involvement of civil society, churches and other organisations.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, can I just say that if if we look at the objectives which are laid down in the decision which was decided by the Parliament and the Council, there is nothing in there about convincing people. There's something about informing people. There's something about showing an active interest. There's something about critical thinking as well. So it is also for us an opportunity to step a little bit outside, which can be quite nerve-wracking, but to step outside the comfort zone and meet people where they are. So that is the first thing. We want to meet people where they are and try to engage with them. A large part of the funding available will go to member states and to civil society. So that means, because we are fully aware that it makes very little sense for us to decide here in Brussels what this year will entail. So that means that, as I said, all member states, and I know that the member states are working very, very closely with the civil society that they have in their country, to draw up their working plans for the year in order to make sure that it comes out as broadly as possible. We've been working very closely. I mean, one of the organisations which was behind this year, which were one of the fathers of the year, together with Mr. Goerens, was indeed Concord. So they are and have been involved all along, and we have taken on board a lot of their ideas. Again, the amount per European citizen is not enormous, and that's why we will work through social media website, etc., etc. We will ensure that there is a work as well carried out by other Commission services, so that this is a common endeavour for all of us next year. Coming back to Mr. Goerens, a question concerning what the Parliament as such will do. Indeed, he mentioned the European Development Days, which will take place next year in June, which will be dedicated to this. And I'm also more than happy to send the conclusions of the event that we had on the 19th of June on different aspects in terms of communication, if that can serve as inspiration for the European Parliament, because we are very, very keen to have you on board. Since one of the signatures of the letter from the Parliament came from the President who's been re-elected, I'm hoping that there will still be support from the Parliament on this very important endeavour.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and that concludes that point on the agenda.